Wow. Hey, much love and respect. Pura vida, mi gente. Thanks for tuning in once again. Really appreciate you guys taking the time to do that. Um, we're gonna go into this book. I've read from it before. It's two good volumes of this book, and you know, I haven't really gone into it as much as I want to, and I'm going to start doing that now with you guys. There's a lot of good info in here. Um, we've read from it, little parts of it in old videos, but we're gonna get into it a lot more now. This book is called History of America Before Columbus, according to documents and approved authors, by P. DeRue, member of the Archaeological Club of the Land Van Wise and of the United States Catholic Historical Society, honorary member of the American Catholic Historical Society of Philadelphia. Again, this is volume 1 from 1900. And when he says according to documents and approved authors, he actually quotes a lot of good historical and scholarly sources. So it's a pretty good book. Again, this is volume 1. So we're just going to belly flop real quick, start out in chapter 3. We're not going to read everything, but we're going to be reading different parts of different chapters a little bit. Chapter 1 was literally talking about the origin of the Indians, and basically they don't know. That's the main conclusion, but they can't say that they are not old and that they're not part of the old world people. That's one of the main themes there. And also that there was no apes here, just like in other parts, and that Darwinism is really ridiculous. That's literally what they're talking about in chapter 1. Chapter 2 kind of goes over the antiquity of man in America. It points out a lot of stuff we actually gone over before, like the Calavera stone and Pliocene man and the different things they found, like old bones, human bones, and geological strata that, it's dating it to like thousands of years before they even said humans were in America. So they went over that in chapter 2. I'm going to pick up right here at chapter 3. It says, pre-Christian American nations. We have already met with a few signs of the fact that primeval man lived on the American continent in regular company of fellow beings and constituted society. But it is difficult, not to say impossible, for even the most learned and careful researcher to determine which were the first nations that inhabited our hemisphere. Geology and archaeology clearly demonstrate that various peoples succeeded one another in America, nay, in our United States. Henry W. Haynes concludes his learned chapters in Windsor's Narrative and Critical History of America by expressing his belief that the so-called Indians of our day, with their many divisions into numerous linguistic families, were later comers to our shores than the primitive population. But it is not equally evident whence they came, where they settled, when or in what order they appeared and disappeared again. So they're saying there seems to be a primitive people that were here, and then later on, migrations of people from other parts of the world. That's what he's saying. But again, he also said they can't really prove it. They just believe that. But hey, again, remember, guys, let's go with what we already learned. America is the true old world. A lot of these authors, they're always going to see it in reverse, always making America uninhabited and bringing other people here to civilize us. Oppenmer and others, founding their opinion on Plato's description of Atlantis, think that America was inhabited before the biblical deluge. Many people have already researched this and concluded this, that if Adam was not created here, listen, if Adam was not created here, Noah at least was a Native American. Listen, Noah was a Native American. All right, doesn't that fit with what we know about the ship Noah built? It was built out of gopher wood, right? They find that in Florida and Brazil. This is native to the Americas, the gopher wood, right? I mean, Old World Florida just redid another video. He's talked about this a lot. And many people before him, I've done a couple videos on that. Again, as it says here, Noah at least was a Native American, and that it would be more correct to say that after the flood, people returned. They came back, then came to our shores. All right. So they were here before the flood, and then after the flood, they had come back. That's what he's saying, letting you know here. Again, he has a lot of quotes. You guys see a lot of sources. The races, however, that lived either before or immediately after the deluge have left but the faintest vestiges of their passage. One of them, noticed by the learned, is called Dolichocephalous race because a few discovered crania show the antero-posterior longer than the transverse diameter of the skull. These remains were so far found mainly in the valley of Calabazo, Chile, near the Lagoa Sumiduro, Brazil, and in La Plata, Bolivia. Remember, we just read a book talking about La Plata, and it's people there and the gods, what they're saying, what they're finding in Europe, the mythology there. We read that in the Researches into the Lost History of America in the last chapter that we just read. The tribes of the Amazon region, wherever they originated, certainly came up from the south into the lands they now occupy. However diverse now, they are all supposed to be descended from the long-headed Tupis and Guaranis. There we go, the Tupis again. We just read about this the other day, right? Displaced an earlier. So the Tupis and Guaranis, they're saying, displaced an earlier and short-headed race whose skulls are found in the shell heaps of the coast. Their associated fossils are proof sufficient that the race was contemporaneous with animals long since extinct. Listen, living with extinct animals, humans, and lived according to the discoveries of Mr. Ameghino in dugouts, covered in some instances with the Glyptodon's scaly frame. Ameghino's reports should further lead us to admit that the Dolichocephalous were a post-Diluvian people feeding on animals, with which they carried on both defensive and offensive war, armed with weapons of flint-shaped and sharpened by percussion. Few of these teeth, which they left for the inspection of modern scientists, were affected with caries, but they show evident signs of hard use, and the incisors are often worn to the roots. Were they perhaps one of the long-lived biblical nations? Listen, biblical nations, the antediluvians who lived many years, as we shall find is stated by some of the most ancient European writers. Not only the Brazilian Botocudos, but according to Dr. P. Joseph, the Patagonians also, and the Eskimo are still perpetuating this primeval race. Joseph further gratuitously pretends that they were of a yellow color, that during their migration from Asia they had lost the fundamental elements of civilization and that they had no permanent domiciles. All right, again, making them come from another part of the world. And, there's a whole, back in the 1800s, 1700s, out of Asia theory, not out of Africa, but out of Asia, right, where supposedly Noah landed, right? They're trying to say that was the cradle. But North America is Asia Major. This is the farthest east. Remember, we saw the map of North America being called Asia. These statements are more or less in accord with our theory of progress, but for all we know, they rest on no positive facts. The bones attest that their owners were human beings, but whether they were highly civilized or reduced to the lowest grade of savagism, no witness have yet appeared to testify, neither have they left any vestiges from which we may conclude either that they followed the dictates of primeval revelation, or had fallen to the worship of idols, or lower yet to religious destitutions. Numerous extensive and most interesting remains have revealed to the learned the passage of another race over the length and breadth of the western continent, called the race of the Kitchen Middings. From the large mounds of collected shells, bones, and other kitchen offal which they have left behind them, these shell heaps are from 3 to 30 feet high. Some cover quite extensive areas and are to be found along the Atlantic coast from Nova Scotia down to Florida and even into Brazil. All right, so all over the Americas, even in Central America, there's a lot of those here as well. South America, they're stating here. A mound of Kitchen Middings has been discovered in the last country on the banks of the Saguaso River, others on the coast of the Mexican Gulf, up the river valleys through nearly all of our southern states, and along the shores of the Pacific Ocean, all the way from Alaska to Central America, like I just said. The vast extent of country, nearly all America, where these heaps are to be found, affords abundant evidence of the spread of this nation and the huge masses of accumulated shells and similar remains prove, like Monte Testaccio of the Romans, that they were large in numbers, sedentary in habits, and that they endured for many centuries. Winchell says, from the testimony of shell heaps, it appears that the Aleutian Islands have been occupied by tribes of Aurarian or seacoast people type, from an epoch so remote that their populations were without houses, clothing, fire, lamps, ornaments, weapons, unless of the most primitive kind, implements of the chase for fishing or even for cooking, what they might have found upon the shores. Professor Dahl concludes that the lower layer in the shell mounds of the Aleutian Islands require 1,000 years for its accumulation, and the overlying fish layer and hunting layer 1,500 to 2,000 years. That's like 2, 3, 4,000 years almost, right? He thinks 3,000 years are not too high an estimate for the duration of occupation of these islands by the Kitchen Middings. With reference to the age of the shell heaps, Wyman states that there is to be seen near Silver Springs, where a heap is reported to cover nearly 20 acres, a grove of live oaks, measuring from 13 to 27 feet in circumference, on its slope farthest from the water. Excavations made beneath the largest of them show that 3 was more recent than the shell mound itself. If at the beginning of the 2nd century of the life oak there are 12 rings at least to the inch, then the 3 had an age of not less than 600 years and was near the 2nd century of its existence at the time of landing of Columbus. So again, remember about dating, radiocarbon dating and using the tree rings. It's not as accurate as we thought, but it could be old is what I'm trying to say. These estimates, though, approximatively only, right? They're only approximating, they're telling you right here, carry back the origin of the mounds beyond the reach of history or tradition, beyond, and certainly one of 2 centuries before the last discovery of America. All right, again, you can't discover a place that already had people. These shell heaps cannot be more recent than the trees growing upon them, and were necessarily abandoned long before the surviving giants commenced to live. The surviving giants. Listen, giants. Remember what they're finding in these mounds. For who shall tell how many years or centuries it took before the first acorn reached the spot and found sufficient soil gathered over the shell to germinate and grow. It is impossible indeed to determine the time of the existence of this race, although we can say that they are of a relatively late period, because the numerous researches made among their kitchen middens have not brought to light any remnant of the gigantic extinct American fauna, while the fossils evince the fact that the animals at their time were the same as inhabit our hemisphere, yet with the exception of a larger deer and a canine that have left their bones among the debris. We shall soon observe that the colonies of this race on the Scandinavian coast lasted much longer than the American parent stock. Oh, body bag for the illusion. Didn't we just read, right? What did we just read the other day, guys? That if anybody crossed the Atlantic first, it had to have been American Indians. And remember about the Gulf Stream, bringing people over there into Scandinavian coast? They just told you right here, they're going to have a whole chapter dedicated to this, which we're going to get to. He said, we're going to soon observe that the colonies of this race, these people that were building these mound heaps, these shell heaps, eventually ended up on the Scandinavian coast, and that their history lasted a little longer over there than the American parent stock, than the original people they descend from in America. All right? Pay attention, guys. America's the true old world. They've been telling us this in all these scholarly books, and he's quoting people. Look at the sources. These are real scholarly sources. We've gone over a lot of these, okay? The shell heaps give unmistakable evidence of the nature of these people's food. On both seashores and riverbanks, they fed almost exclusively on oysters and other shellfish, and on aquatic animals generally farther up the rivers. The remains of fish are intermixed with the bones of mammals, and some stone mortars found in the shell heaps, principally in California, would allow us to conjecture that cereals formed a part of their diet. We would gladly stop here our remarks on their food, but the fossil remnants of their aliments establish a fact disparaging our ancient humanity. and proved that this was not only a late but a degraded nation also. From a heap on the banks of the Saguaso River, numerous human relics have been taken, the fractures in the bones showing clearly that they had been broken to get out of the marrow. Nadayalak states that the same saddening evidences were produced by the shell mounds of Florida and New England, and Cronau confirms this statement. Short and Jousset do not doubt that the kitchen midden race was addicted to the cannibalism, thus the hijack, and Dr. Wyman has deposited in the Peabody Museum, a museum I actually went to. I used to love this museum in Boston, part of Harvard. A collection of human bones taken from the shell banks, so arranged as to confirm to illustrate the assertions of other fossilists. This abomination, which prevailed yet at the commencement of the 16th century nearly all over America from the Algonquins to the Fuegians, may perhaps serve as a clue in our search after the origin of this fallen people, while Herodotus tells us that several countries in the neighborhood of Scythia were infected with the same vice. Scythians, huh? Who's the Scythian Saxon sons of Sakai, the sons of Isaac? We may well, therefore, if not, give an affirmatory answer, at least put the question whether this prehistoric nation was like the later American Indians or Asiatic, Scythian, or Tartar ancestry, and had from the Ural Altai Mountains continued to move in the easterly direction to both shores of the Pacific and the Atlantic Ocean. All right, again, seen in reverse. Continuing, he says that the kitchen middings were of Asiatic origin can hardly be doubted by one who observes that their monuments are to be found at both the abutments of the gigantic natural bridge which spans the northern Pacific Ocean from Alaska to Japan. So only because they're finding, the same kind of mounds in Japan and heading towards Alaska and the so-called Barren, they say, oh, it has to be Asian. But why are they always seeing in reverse? Why couldn't people come out of here? Just like the camel and the horse who went from here, North America, into Asia in that same route. And people, you don't think people would follow the animals, right? Didn't they teach us that? Of course, because this is supposed to be uninhabited and covered by ice and all this stuff, they say, no, it can't be from here. They have to be from Asia. This is Asia, Asia Major. This is the farthest east. This is where Marco Polo came, guys. So he's saying they have to be from over there. He's saying several shell heaps are indeed to be seen near Tokyo and Omori, Japan, which are of great antiquity. Again, these might be descendants of ancient Americans, bringing that technology or that building style over there. F.V. Dickin and J. Milne confidently assert that these shell heaps and the pottery found in them are of Aino origin. The Aino, huh? Taino, add a T right here. Taino, Aino, the Anu people of Japan. These were melanated folks. That is made by one of the most ancient Mongoloid families that reside in the east of Nippon down to the 13th or 14th century and has a few survivors still on the island of Yeso. Yeso. So Mongoloid families, huh? That word is a misnomer. Mongol meant great or great empire. All right? That's the hijack with their race classifications. Man, we've gone over this. But Professor E.S. Morse thinks he finds in some shell heaps near Tokyo pottery which was not made by Ainos, and he regards it as evidence of a race even older than the Ainos. Add a T right here, guys, where you get Ainos, huh? On the Pacific coast near San Francisco, there is a shell mound almost a mile long and a mile wide, where a few years ago, at a depth of 20 feet, numerous human skeletons were found. One baby had been rolled in a long piece of red silk. This piece of red silk, Southall remarks, proves communication with Asia. Why? Because silk's supposed to be only in Asia, right? That's why they're saying that. This same race had also fixed their dwellings along the western coast of northern Europe, and especially in Denmark, where several of the characteristic piles of kitchen middens there called Kojoken Modinger have been discovered perfectly similar to those of our continent, just the same as over here. Likely some of those people migrated across the northern Atlantic either because of their crowding numbers at home or as a consequence of unsuccessful wars with newcomers from Asia, and thus became the first American discoverers of Europe long centuries before Columbus got sight of the Western Hemisphere. Again, seen in reverse. And we just read earlier that the American was the parent stock of these Scandinavian people. Make it make sense, man. The Danish shell heaps are evidently of a much later formation than those of America. All right? They're much more recent than the ones in America. So who came first? You just contradicted yourself. And of containing as they do articles of bronze and iron, right? Copper, right? They're getting, where's the biggest copper mines, the most pure copper in the world that they use to make their so-called bronze and iron ages, some of which are undoubtedly of Roman period. This race was not even in America, deprived of a certain degree of civilization as appears from the relics they left us. Among these we find stone implements shaped with greater art and care than during a preceding period, needles and butkins finely made of bone, stone mortars, and other objects which display workmanship of the most remarkable perfection. Debris of earthenware, some of rude handiwork, others of superior execution, represent the form of animals with considerable accuracy. A little bit ahead of this book, it starts talking about another people here that we've actually read about and associate nation but seldom spoken of. And that seems to be next in order. If we consider its remaining vestiges of culture, is that of the cave dwellers or troglodytes, of whom we shall give an idea by briefly stating the discoveries made in two caves of these United States. And remember, we read in the books of ancient South America that these cave dwellers or troglodytes in South America were people of dark complexion, quite distant from each other, the former of which is known as Salt Cave, Kentucky. There's a cave there, right? That they found these people in one little dwelling place at about 3 miles from the entrance of this cave. The learned Putnam made out the footprints of a man shod with sandals, and a little farther he found the actual sandals themselves, made with great skill of interwoven reeds. The garments of the cavemen were woven of the bark of young trees, some black stripes placed on a piece of cloth so prepared, and fragments of fringe also found in the cave. Fragments of fringes, right, on the clothes, fringes bore testimony to their taste for dress. All right, fringes on their clothes. And again, Numbers 15, read the Bible. What does it say? Another piece of stuff, curiously mended, gave proof of their industry and economy. Remains were also picked up of the gourds, often of considerable size, and two finely worked arrow points. The discovery of sandals, woven stuffs, and gourds, the absence of bones of animals, and the apparently long habitation of the cave suggests a sedentary population devoted to agriculture, and no longer dependent for food upon hunting and fishing. A mummy was discovered in 1813 in the other cave, Short's Cave, and a careful comparison between the clothes it wore and the remains found in Salt Cave allow us to class them as identical in character. They also had fringes. Here then we have the relics of a people whose habitat extended over a large area and whose great care in burying the dead affords evidence of their having preserved several important tenets of primordial revelation. We may conjecture that they were good moral Christians, thus the hijack, in the broad sense of the word, of course. Putnam adds that these cavemen presented every appearance of a culture very much superior to that of the savages of whom the shell heaps are witnesses. But we allow ourselves to call in question his opinion, namely that they probably date from a less remote antiquity, the remarks we made before, and his own statement, to wit, that certain details of the burial point to great antiquity of the mummy found in Short's Cave are reasons why we should rather differ with him. We ought to notice that Justin Winsor assigns, however, to the American cave dwellers the chronological place which seems rightfully to be theirs, by mentioning them before speaking of the Kitchen Middings. He also states that Dr. Lund and Danish naturalists examined several hundred Brazilian caves, finding in them the bones of man in connection with those of extinct animals. Modern man with extinct animals, right? You see number one, and you got the sources here where you can go check that out. Nor would it be out of place to ask whether the cave dwellers were preceded or followed by another prehistoric race, evidently more powerful and of a higher civilization, namely the Mound-builders. Short assures that the history of this latter nation is a sealed book, and their origin as uncertain as the period of man's origin. They don't know how to where or who the Mound-builders are or when they originated, so they can't say they're from this time period. That's a guess. They could be from a lot older times. Yet their gigantic works have left, even until this day, unmistakable traces, not only of their presence in our United States, but of their power, of their arts and sciences, and of their religion as well. The archaeological name of these peoples derived from the mounds, generally built of earth, sometimes of bricks. All right, bricks. These mounds are built with bricks and in rare cases of stone, which they have left behind all the way from the Atlantic coast to the Rocky Mountains and from the Gulf of Mexico to the 40th parallel of northern latitude. The remains of their labors are most noticeable in the valleys of the Mississippi, but they attract hardly less attention of the shores of Lake Superior and in the marshes of Florida. One of their monuments is a circular earthen enclosure on the Genesee River in New York State, comprising an area of 6 acres or more, partly surrounded by a ditch, while on one quarter of a precipitous bank formed as defense. The enclosure was connected with the river by a causeway, a circumstance of unusual occurrence in connection with works of this kind. On the Tonawanda, at an interval of a couple of miles, are the remains of two other enclosures, the intermediate tract being regarded as the site of an ancient double fortified town. More important are the remains of Pompeii in Onondaga County. All right, Pompeii, where a fortified town of 500 acres is shown to have existed and was defended by three circular forts situated triangularly at equal distances. Even greater are the monuments of the south bank of the Licking near Newark. These works comprise, besides other extensive buildings, underground passages and an observatory 30 feet high. All right, there's advanced people here. At Camillus and on the Seneca River, and all through the state of New York, no less than 100 of these ancient remains have been found. You guys hear how many mounds, right? Like traces of the mound builders have been discovered in Virginia, North and South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, and all along the eastern coast. Mounds everywhere. Near Wheeling, Mr. Bradford writes there are appearances of fortifications and enclosures commencing in the vicinity of the mounds upon Grave Creek and continuing at intermediate distances for 10 or 12 miles along the banks of the Ohio, communicating with one another and having from the largest enclosure a broad causeway that leads towards the neighboring hills. All right, so again, they're mentioning these mounds in Newark and in the Grave Creek. Remember what they found in these mounds? They found Hebrew inscriptions, you know, they call the Holy Stones, the Grave Creek Stone, Paleo Hebrew inscriptions. Remember, the banks of the Little River, of the Okmulgee, sorry, Altamaha, and Savannah rivers present similar imposing monuments. Mounds and terraces are also to be seen on the Chattahoochee, and on continuation of them extends into Alabama and farther to the south. At Salem, Ashtabula County, Ohio, we meet with an enclosure situated on a hill and fortified by two circular walls, with a ditch intervening. In Warren County, between two branches of the Little Miami, on an elevated zigzag plateau, the ruins of a powerful fortification exist, and near Chillicothe, on both sides of Paint Creek, numerous and extensive ruins invite the attention of the antiquarian. They all are of the same usual character, comprising square and circular mounds, roads, wells, and oblong elevated works. Again, these are advanced people here. In every state of the Union, except on the western slope, like vestiges of this ancient, powerful, and populous race are to be found. The traces of them, writes Mr. Brackenbridge to the American Philosophical Society, are astonishingly numerous in the western country. I should not exaggerate, he continues, if I were to say that 5,000 might be found, some of them enclosing more than 100 acres, all right, just in the western country, he's saying. The monuments of the mound builders consist of enormous conical pyramids, excavated areas, vast terraces, irrigation canals, wells, ponds, underground passages and causeways, all of them constructed in a manner so substantial that they remain perfectly discernible until this day. As a general thing, their artificial monticles and embankments are made of accumulated earth, but at places the walls partly consist of indigenous rough stones. Near Chillicothe are found two elliptical elevations constructed of stone and of truly cyclopean character. Cyclopean character. Remember the book Researches into the Lost Histories of America? Who built the cyclopean buildings of Europe? He said it was Americans. Earthworks were frequently supported by brick constructions, and at 1100 miles west of Montreal, Mr. de Verandrieri discovered both in a wood and in a plain huge monolithic pillars erected by man's hand. In another place devoid of stone, he found large squared stone blocks placed one on top of the other as to form a wall. All right, remember these walls they're finding on these monuments that they're saying, hey, that's natural, but they're actually man-made walls. This is what they're talking about here. The shape of the mound-builders' gigantic works generally is either circular or quadrangular, but whenever the counter of the ground or natural defenses would indicate a change of the customary plans, the builders intelligently adopted the elliptic or any polygonal form. In certain cases, mounds of various shapes form together a general combination of a triangle, a polygon, or a circle, and in every instance, modern study feels obliged to approve the plans of the prehistoric architects. Prehistoric architects. Some of the terraces represent in their contours the shape of men, elephants, and other animals, an indication which would judge that they were intended for pleasurable rather than for utilitarian purposes, and that their builders were, notwithstanding their antiquity, sufficiently endowed with art and physical culture to require such luxuries as our modern civilization could hardly afford. They were building, right, these mounds that depict animals. He's saying, why would they do this? They had so much time. They had to be in a state of high civilization where they had time to do that. Besides these fantastic monuments, the learned, distinguished, or several other kinds of mounds left us by this interesting race. They mention their fortifications in connection with their observation and signal posts, their temple enclosures and temples, their sacrifice and burial pyramids. The best military judges, Mr. Bradford writes, have observed the skill with which the sites of many of the fortifications have been selected, and the artful combination of natural advantages with artificial means of defense exhibited in their construction, the care which was everywhere visible about these ruins to protect every part from a foe without the high plane of which they are situated. Generally 40 feet above the country around it, the pains taken to get at the water as well as to protect those who wish to obtain it, the fertile soil of the neighborhood, which appears to have been cultivated. All these are circumstances that speak volumes in favor of the sagacity of their authors, all right? And again, we're talking about prehistoric people here, right? Look at this advanced civilization here in the Americas. Mr. Harris says, the engineers who directed the execution of the Miami work appear to have known the importance of flank defenses, and if their bastions are not so perfect as those which are in use in modern engineering, their precision and their long lines of curtains are precisely as they should be. Mr. Carver bears similar testimony. Though much defaced by time, every angle is distinguishable and appears as regular and fashioned with as much military skill as if planned by Vauban himself. The mound builders, forts enclosed, besides defensive works, wells, and artificial lakes, burying places, gardens, and strategic lookouts. The works on the south bank of the Licking near Newark comprise an octagonal and a circular fort connected by parallel walls, a circular and a square fort similarly connected, and an enclosure containing 150 acres, together with numerous small works of defense, underground passages, and an observatory 30 feet high. The area comprised by the whole was between 3 and 400 acres. Wow. Similar military constructions, which we have no space to describe, are found in many other localities. All right. Now, this makes me think of these star forts, right? Like, so you got these prehistoric people building mounds all over the place. Imagine them continuing over the thousands of years, how they would have perfected that to the point where you're creating these star forts. We're talking about forts, right? And military constructions, right? That's what we're talking about right now, right? What is a star fort? I mean, I know they had other purposes, but come on now. In connection with their fortifications, these people had also regular systems of signal mounts placed on lofty summits, visible from their settlements, and communicating with the great watercourses at immense distances. These systems were more extensive than and as perfect as those in use at the beginning of the present century. Another kind of mound are considered by archaeologists as remains of immense and sumptuous edifices destined for religious purposes. They were truncated pyramids, surrounded by an enclosure of other buildings of smaller dimensions. The most notable in Georgia, and best deserving attention, is a truncated conical mound 50 feet high and 800 in circumference at the base. The summit was reached by a spiral stair, while four niches at different intervals and corresponding with the four cardinal points would make it appear that it was intended for purposes of religion. Around in the immediate vicinity are other erections varying from 6 to 10 feet in height, but having a quadrangular area of 400 feet. The one of St. Louis on the Cahokia is over 90 feet high, and its circumference is of some 2,200 feet, thus attaining the dimensions of the famous pyramid of Asichis. Okay, the famous pyramid of Asichis. You can read that in Gravier to get the source. These structures, similar in form to the latter teocallis or temples of Mexico, most probably had the same destination, but numerous excavations have clearly demonstrated that several pyramids and truncated cones have been raised by the mound builders to serve as in Egypt, just like in Egypt and other countries, as glorious resting places for the mortal remains of either some great personages or of influential or powerful families. These tumuli, which until the present day inspire awe and admiration, are found in every part of the country. Again, in every part of the country. The tumuli in Scioto County are both numerous and interesting. They are very common on the Ohio, from its highest sources to its mouth, few and small. Comparatively, they are found on the waters of the Monongahela, but increase in number and size as we descend toward the mouth of the stream at Pittsburgh. As many as 500 and more have been shown to exist in the state of Kentucky alone. In Illinois, within a small circle of a few miles, 150 have been erected, differing in altitude, in magnitude, and figure. Some of them in the shape of truncated pyramids are constructed upon artificially formed terraces of 2 or more stages. All of these cemeteries contain a larger or smaller quantity of human bones. Mr. Caleb Atwater, who carefully searched the mounds of Ohio, assures us that many of them contains an immense number of skeletons. In some tumuli, the fact has been discovered that the bodies were laid bedtimes on a bed of stone and were by another layer of stone, formerly a vault, protected against the weight of the superimposed elevation. All right, so I know we know already. We've read a lot how many burials these mounds are. Burial mounds that a lot of these mounds are. Sorry, and what size the bones they're finding in a lot of them. Right, 7 footers, 8 footers, 9 footers. Right. Now, dialogue affords an instance of another curious kind of the mound builders' burials. Excavations on some mounds at Greenwood, near Lebanon, Tennessee, Lebanon, have revealed burial places. From 1 to 200 skeletons have been found in each stratum of the mounds. It has been remarked, he adds, that the earth with which they were covered did not belong to the spot in which they were found, but must have been brought there from a distance. This fact bears witness to the respect shown by these men to their dead, and to the importance they attached to the funeral rites. That the corpse, however, were not invariably buried entire is evidenced by the presence of ashes, charcoal, and calcinite remains. In Ohio, near Lancaster, a tumulus was found to contain an enormous earthen coffin, 18 feet long by 6 wide and 2 deep. It rested a thick layer of ashes and charcoal, and manifested by its appearance that it had been subjected to the action of a powerful fire. It contained the remains of 12 human beings of different sizes and ages. And the dialect likewise states the fact that in some places interred corpses and incinerated remains are found almost side by side. The mound builders' burial grounds not only contain their personal remains, but also various kinds of relics of their workmanship, and are rich mines of archaeological information. Arrowheads, cutlery, and hammers of flint and stone highly polished are found in them, by the side of similar tools, weapons, and ornaments made of several kinds of metal, and especially of copper, which they knew how to extract from the mines near Lake Superior, all right? Michigan copper, right? Remember? Yeah, the most pure copper in the world, where they find it? In the Americas. They found that same copper in Europe to create their Bronze Age, to purify, and to manufacture. Besides ochre, crystal, and jasper, the tumuli contain quantities of mica, either in its natural state or fashioned into plates, metals, and beautiful mirrors. Iron seems to have been unknown in America at the time of the Spanish discovery, but remember, guys, they have found iron here. We've gone over this information, right? We've gone over this information. But the mound builders' graveyards afford proof that they not only knew it, right? Mound builders had iron, but manufactured it into tools and implements. Iron Age, huh? Iron, bronze. We had metallurgy here. Metallurgy, the origin, the first people to create that was American Indians. We got the encyclopedia of contributions of American or Native Americans to the world, clearly showing us that we contribute that to the world. In the sepulchral mounds at Marietta, there was found in the year 1819 a little lump of iron ore that had almost the specific gravity of pure iron and presented the appearance of being partially smelted, while in the mound at Circleville, oxidized iron was unearthed in the shape of a plate. Silver has been discovered in several tumuli as either simply pieces of the precious metal or the metal manufactured into a variety of beautiful ornaments or used to plate copper and other inferior materials. Even gold ornaments are said to have been found in some cemeteries at the mound builders. More common but not less useful minerals were known to the mound builders, such as coal and lead, which they obtained by laboriously digging away the strata under which the mineral lay hidden. It is likely that this same nation, by sinking deep shafts at Oil Creek near Titusville, Pennsylvania, at Mecca, Ohio, and at Ennis Hill in Canada, obtained the kerosene, which they probably knew how to utilize, as well as the ancient people of Persia and China, just like the ancient Persians and so-called Chinese. Just the same. It's the same, guys. So what do you mean people came from over there and then, brought this knowledge? Like, people over here were doing that. What is the oldest land that came out of the waters, right? If the oldest land is here, why wouldn't it have the oldest people? All this goes to show that the mound builders were no savages. But if we make another step into our study of their relics, we shall be compelled to admit that they were extraordinarily skillful, advanced in art, and not deprived of a high degree of science, not expected to be found among so ancient a nation. All right? They don't expect people of such ancient times to be so skillful and knowledgeable with such a high degree of science. They're telling you right here, but they found that here in the Americas, guys. To substantiate this assertion, we need only mention a few articles of their beautiful handiwork. Their industry is evinced by various kinds and a great number of their domestic utensils, and by the cloths of which they made their clothing, woven ingeniously of different fibrous substances, and in particular of the tender bark of young trees. Beads of bone and shell, carved bones, and sculptured stones are by no means rare. Quite a number of their weapons and instruments were made from the hardest of rock, and arrowheads, axes, and hatchets of granite and hornblende, nicely cut and polished, are of frequent occurrence. The covers of some of the urns are composed of calcareous breccia, skillfully wrought. The pieces of stone worn as ornaments and found interred with the dead have been drilled and worked into precise shapes, and the pipe bowls ornamented with beautifully carved reliefs. In a mound at Cincinnati were found carved vases and the sculptured representation of a bird's head. On June of 1819, upon opening a mound at Marietta, some very remarkable objects were discovered, consisting of three large circular copper bosses thickly overlaid with silver, and apparently intended as ornaments for a buckler or a sword belt. All right? This is what they're finding here in ancient America. But they didn't teach us none of this stuff in school. On the reverse were two plates fastened by a copper rivet or nail, around which was flaxen thread, while between the plates were two small pieces of leather. The copper showed much sign of decay, and was almost reduced to an oxide. But the silver, though much corroded, resumed its natural brilliancy on being burnished. In the same tumulus was also found a hollow silver plate, 6 inches long and 2 broad, intended apparently as the upper part of a sword scabbard. Okay, swords. The scabbard itself seems to have perished into the course of time, as no other portion of it was found, with the exception of a few broken, rust-eaten pieces of a copper tube, which was likely intended for the reception of the point of the weapon. In addition to these, there was also discovered in the same sepulchral ruin a piece of copper of 3 ounces weight, which in shape resembled a builder's plumb, and may have been used for architectural purposes. It is well known that a great number of pipe bowls, indicative of a modern luxury, and prehistoric times have been found in many necropolis. Some were made of copper hammered out and not welded but lapped over. A bracelet of copper was discovered in a stone mound near Chillicothe. I have seen, says the writer of the Archaeologia Americana, several arrowheads of this metal, some of which were 5 to 6 inches in length and must have been used as heads of spears. Circular medals of this same metal, several inches in diameter, very thin and much injured by time, have often been found in the tumuli. They had no inscription that I could discover. Some of them were large enough to have answered for breastplates. All right, breastplates. When considering the relics of this noble prehistoric race, as perfect as gigantic, one can hardly help thinking of another people that would be prehistoric also, were it not for the biblical records, that is, of the Egyptians, who built their everlasting pyramids compelled with their Jewish slaves to mold their bricks, and of a Gentile grandee of Job, who perhaps contemporary of the mound builders, Job, contemporary to the mound builders, right? So-called Egyptians, right? Where we getting into? Ancient Egypt was right here. Tamari, that was right here. Expressed the wish that his discourses might be written with an iron pen and in a plate of lead, or else be graven with an instrument, Kelty and flint stone. But few modern cutlery manufacturers could temper and sharpen Job's burin, and who prepared the tools of the mound builders, brick burners, and stone cutters, of their miners and ore smelters, of their mechanics, artists, and engravers of flint? Right? He's asking, who could have done that? If mechanical arts and material welfare were civilization and refinement, we might presume that the ancient mound builders would not be unwelcomed in our best society circles, as theory of perpetual progress notwithstanding. To justify this strange opinion, we will adduce only one more proof, namely, the remains of their ceramic art, as they may have seen at the National Museum of Washington, D.C. We have noticed already the carved vases found in a burial mound at Cincinnati. A great quantity of curious and well-finished colored pottery has been brought to several museums from the tumuli of the mound builders. Some of the vessels have been pronounced by competent authority to be equal to anything of the kind manufactured elsewhere in the world, just like any other so called Old World culture. Two covers of vessels were found in a stone mound in Ross County, Ohio, very ingeniously wrought by the artist and highly polished. They are made of calcareous breccia and resemble almost exactly and are equal to vessels of that material produced in Italy at the present day, just like what they make in Italy today. These ancient mound builders were making. A number of specimens are found to have been manufactured on our scientific principles, capable, in some instances, as are assayers' vessels, of withstanding a high degree of heat. They were made of clay and pulverized sandstone or calcareous matter, artistically wrought, polished, glazed, and burned. A very remarkable specimen was found more than half a century ago in the alluvial soil of the Ohio, bearing upon it the marks of fire, and was proved to be capable of sustaining intense heat. It was conjectured that it had been used as crucible. Another was an urn discovered in Chillicothe and pronounced to be an exact copy of one unearthed in Scotland, just like one unearthed in Scotland, right? Remember the Gulf Stream? Remember American Indians heading over that way, getting stuck in the currents or just sailing over there? So that makes sense that they found exact copies of this in Scotland, ancient Scotia. The readers has noticed how these people were skillful in cutting stone, burning brick, and making use of these materials. How they were likely the first to exploit the copper mines of the Great Lakes, and from the foregoing statements, we might easily infer that they were also given to agricultural pursuits, a conclusion which is sustained by direct positive evidence. While some of their canals united lake systems, others that can yet be followed for hundreds of miles, canals, man-made canals, hundreds of miles, guys, had four evident objects: the irrigation of dry land and the promotion of their profitable culture. On an island in Lake George, Florida, are the ruins of a considerable town and of a pyramidal mound connected by a double wall with a neighboring plain or savanna, indicating the agricultural character of the people. Now, guys, we already know, agriculture started here in the Americas. When we're talking about, all these foods of the world today that people, these staple foods, a lot of them originate in America. Most importantly, maize, right? Corn. Check out my corn videos if you haven't. It proves America is the true old world and what helped people settle down and create agriculture and civilization. Maize. There's a lot of fossilized evidence and records that people were doing agriculture here in very, very early remote times, in history. More evident signs are presented by the extensive garden beds and terraces found in Wisconsin and Missouri, like I just said, whose agricultural object could hardly be mistaken. As Putnam says, there seems to be enough evidence that the constructors of the old earthworks were an agricultural race. Nay, that the mound builders cultivated the soil in a methodical manner far different from the mode pursued by the present Indians is evident from the vestiges of a series of ancient works which occur in portions of the region bordering on Lake Michigan, and particularly in lower Wisconsin, in the valley of Grand River and St. Joseph's, Michigan, as also in northern Indiana, and which are known as garden beds. Many of the lines of the plots are rectangular and parallel. Others are semicircular and variously curved, forming avenues differently grouped and disposed. Dr. Lapham describes those of Wisconsin as consisting of low parallel ridges, as if corn had been planted in drills. They average 4 feet in width, and 25 of them have been counted in the space of 100 feet. The depth of the walk between them is about 6 inches. The great variety of the articles found together in the mound builders' distant burial places proves their commercial relations. These seashells of the Atlantic Ocean and of the Mexican Gulf were exchanged for the copper of Lake Superior, and similar barter is indicated by the juxtaposition of coal, silver, flint, ochre, potteries of different material, masterpieces of workmanship, and so on. Pipes made of very hard stone frequently occur in the graves of the mound builders. These pipes often represent animals or birds peculiar to South America, and we must infer, therefore, that the mound builders trafficked directly or indirectly with that region, as we know they did with other far distant localities. All right. So I just want to add, Guy Gears, just think of Caral Supe, Peru, right? That ancient mother civilization. We're talking about they were cultivating cotton and maize. We're talking about 5,000, 6,000 years ago. We're talking about the oldest trade in the world. Yeah, they were trading with people in North America. Yes, there is a connection with North and South America and Central America, guys. A lot of people still asking me that in the comments. A singular evidence at once of the kingship and the enterprise of the American races, says Southall, is the presence in the mounds of Ohio, of the pearls and shells of the Gulf, of the obsidian of Mexico, of the mica of North Carolina, of the jade of Chile, and of the lead of Wisconsin, of the copper and probably the silver of Ontonagon and the Keweenaw Peninsula, and of carvings representing the manatee of South America, or the Antilles, and the jaguar, the cougar, the toucan, and the parakeet. These sculptures are very similar to those of Peru, just like the ones in Peru, guys, they're finding here in North America, and are not inferior as works of art. Nor do the mounds bear witness only to the mound builders' high degree of perfection in mechanical art and material pursuits, but they also testify to some of their strictly scientific attainments. They were acquainted with the circle, the square, the triangle, and all other geometrical figures. They knew the four cardinal points towards which they invariably made the openings of their religious edifices. With wonderful accuracy, and experienced antiquarians are inclined to think that they were in possession, if not of a phonetic, at least a symbolic writing system. Of course, we had writing. We've proven that already. Again, if you're new to my channel, please catch up to all my old presentations, no matter how old they are. It's really good information. We've gone over that. We've proven this. Should space allow, we might set forth more evidences of the culture and civilization of this prehistoric race, but we should not neglect to observe that their structures bear testimony to their power no less than to their architectural talent. According to competent engineers, it would take several thousands of our workmen, provided with all the resources of our grand modern industries, long years to erect some of their monuments, among which there are such as rival the Egyptian pyramids in grandeur. You mean that theme park over there? That's geopolymer? That's cement over there. It's a lot easier to build those over there. That's geopolymer. Shout out to Paul Cook. He proved that. He literally went boots on the ground and showed it. That's cement. That's not megalithic. And this is Egypt. What you mean, ancient Egypt? Yeah, this is Egypt. While some of the stones they set up are hardly less in size than those which adorn the neighborhood of the Nile, add to all this that the number of these grand monuments is almost incalculable, and we shall necessarily come to the conclusion that the mound builders were a race numerous and well governed. Widespread as they were, their settlements grew to be very populous. From Mr. Brackenbridge, we learned that as many as 5,000 villages have been discovered in the valley of the Mississippi alone, just in the Mississippi alone. And Mr. Caleb Atwater was of the opinion that the state of Ohio once possessed close up to 1 million inhabitants. Come on now. His grounds for this assertion seem to have been the number and extent of the ruins, as well as the dimensions and content of the tumuli. Many of the mounds, he writes, contain an immense number of skeletons, and not only that, just the agriculture. That's what helps people populate and grow and be civilized. Those of Big Grave Creek are believed to be completely filled with human bones. The larger mounds all along the principal river of the state are also filled with skeletons. Millions of people have been buried in these cemeteries. Again, millions of people. And we got the source for that, number 4, Gleason, volume 2, around here, you see? There's sources for all this, guys. He's not just making this up. Mere numbers of workmen would not account for these ancient monuments. They must have been concerted, directed, and controlled by some governing power, able to pay or to compel thousands of artisans, subjects, or slaves. The vastness and the multitude of the mounds and the relics they contain establish beyond a doubt that the mound builders had a well-regulated government, likely of a religious or military character. That they were not a migratory horde, but a people settled down in the country and governed by laws. Okay? No one will contest this assertion, but it may not unreasonably appear to some that the operatives were of the same servile condition as those who made brick for the Egyptians or built palaces for the emperors of Rome. All right? What Egyptians, what Romans? America's a true old world where these people supposedly come out of. The power and civilization of this race would better suit the plans of modern theorists should they have been found in these United States at the time of the latest discovery of America. But the Northmen, 5 centuries before, met none in our country but scraglings, or miserable savages. And when the other white races made their appearances, or not white races, but other European races came back, remember, we just read again, if anybody was to cross the Atlantic first, it had to have been American Indians. These people, these Northmen, already knew about America. And yeah, they were coming over here and trading and going back and forth, possibly with their ancient ancestors. Again, Eric the Red. Who's the red man, huh? So again, these Europeans did make their appearances. The antique mounds were deserted, and the people by whom they had been constructed were locally extinct. So they had found the mounds. When these Northmen came, these mounds were already vacated. That's how old they were. So that the question of their age and origin necessarily remains a subject of inquiry for the antiquary rather than for the historian. The botanist is perhaps the best of informants in the present case because, while no monumental inscription nor historic account can be offered to determine the age of this race, the searcher may find satisfactory data in the unmistakable record of ages written on Earth's vegetation. Springing from amid the ruins of many of the mound builders' monuments are majestic trees, whose concentric circles or annual layers of wood evince them to be from 600 to 800 years old. And not only that, but presenting evidence of being a second, if not a third of a fourth growth. Gleason writes, quoting from actual researches, most of these monuments are covered with forest, and while many of these trees are of a great age, the vestiges of decayed trunks and the absence of uniformity of character peculiar to a second growth demonstrate that several generations of trees have sprung up and disappeared since these works were deserted. So basically, what I just read, understood there, he's saying not only were they finding old trees growing on top of these mounds, but there was other forests before that on top of these mounds. So they don't know how old these things are. Now, we already gone over the info. We found like fossilized forests underneath rivers, underneath, buried in 30 feet below. Like we found all this stuff, guys. America's truly really old. The sites of ancient works on the Ohio, Mr. Harrison says, present precisely the same appearance as the circumjacent woods. You find on them all the beautiful variety of trees, which give such an unrivaled richness to our forest. This is particularly the case on the 15 acres included within the walls of the mounds at the mouth of the Great Miami, and the relatively proportions of the different kinds of timber are about the same. All right. Just want to remind everybody, what did we read about the fake chronology? The last chapter of Anatoly's book 1, how carbon dating is not to be really trusted, and also that the rings on the trees, that also has a lot of variations that could be wrong as well. They could be much older than what they're telling us. Of what immense age must be these works, covered by two or more groves of large and decaying trees. Huh? With an exclamation, how old could these really be? Another argument in favor of the great antiquity of the ruins are the various physical changes which have manifestly occurred since their erection, and which could only be the result of natural causes protracted through centuries. Thus, in Florida, what manifestly were lakes at one time being approached by avenues from the mounds is now dry land. Is now dry land. Nor is there any record or recollection among the natives of when the change took place. In the West, in like manner, on the margin of deserted lakes and altered rivers, are to be found similar remains, while in the state of New York, the lines of mural relics are on former shores of the Lake Erie and Ontario. The absence, therefore, of all tradition in regard to this race among their successors, as well as the records written in the hearts of the woods and on the geological strata, all lead us to conclude that the mound builders' presence in our state dates from the remotest antiquity. All right? They can't date it. They can't tell you, oh, they were built this year. Oh, the carbon dating says it was. That's all false, guys. They don't know. It just seems that it's really, really, really old. They can't tell. The proposition that they were the first of American powerful nations would involve no contradiction, but there is no proof that they were autochthonous. All right, now there comes a hijack. Why not? If they're from the remotest age, short is of the opinion that they first came into the country in small numbers. See, again, opinion. Oh, he made the opinion that, oh, they might have come from somewhere else. Again, seen in reverse. But here arises the question of their origin, a question that has been answered by various conjectures. All right, you see, he's telling you straight up, it's all opinions people's had, conjectures, none of which have been substantiated by any conclusive argument. So anybody saying, oh, the mound builders came from Asia or came from Europe or wherever, that's just conjectures and opinions that they haven't proven. Colonel Charles Whittlesey affirms that the race of the mounds were unequivocally distinct from the North American Indian and were immigrants from Asia by the way of Bering Strait. Again, that's conjecture. Joseph finds an indication of the Asiatic origin in the outlines of the elephant that circumscribes some of their mounds and in the representations of the same animal on their pottery. So again, that's a good one right there, right? So he's basing it because he's finding, mounds that look like elephants, which we've shown, right? And pipes that are, have elephants on them and stuff. Elephant is not only from Asia, guys. We found the ancestors of all elephants buried all over the Americas. The Americas had so many different types of elephants. We've actually proven this. This is stuff that these scholars didn't look into. They didn't know that stuff. But we know now in 2024. Possibly elephants or even the ancestors of elephants came out of the Americas. We know mammals came out of America. Mammals, yes. We've got the video. Catch up. It's proven by science. So that's a conjecture to say just because they found elephants here that they must have come from Asia. What Asia? This is Asia. How many times do I got to remind you of that? Asia Major, huh? India Superior. Some Jesuits say Gravier took for Tartar characters the unknown signs that were discovered on both sides of a small slab among the stones of an ancient wall, overgrown with trees. Huh? Tartars, huh? Tartary. North America was part of Tartary, so-called Tartary. The statement, though slighting, should not pass unnoticed. H. Bancroft expresses the opinion that the culture of the mound builders was introduced by a colony or by teachers from the south, namely by a colony of the ancient Mayas, who settled in North during the continuance of the great Maya Empire of Xibalba in Central America, several centuries before Christ. I would say back and forth. I'd say, yeah, Mayas came here, but I would say a lot of the people in North America were much older than the so-called Maya Empire. In Central America, so he's saying, yeah, before Christ, right? Others think that the mound builders' migrations have taken place in the opposite direction. Squire remarks that the monuments of the Mississippi grow in grandeur and perfection as we find them nearer the Gulf of Mexico, and that they seem to bear the same religious impressions as those of Central America. So Squire says, no, they came from North America and went down. to Central America. The traditional and the historical testimony of the Mexicans offer new grounds to suppose that their race, the founders of Mexican civilization, were the descendants of those by whom the great works found within the limits of the American Republic were achieved, stating that their ancestors came from the northeast through glacial regions, right? And that's part of their migration stories. We've shown that. Wait, Aslan, Huehuetlapan, and all these names for their the seven caves, Cibola, all these names, Tulan, they were all seems to be in North America. So, reminders of the mound builders' works are presented by the earthen mounds found as far south as Colombia, Peru, and Chile. All right. And guys, we have so many mounds here in Costa Rica, just like the ones in North America, which in like manner contain the bones of the dead and many evidences of the degree of civilization of these countries. Those of Rabinal, Verapaz are especially remarkable in this regard. H. Bancroft further remarks that the mound builders were in some way connected with the civilized nations of Central America, but he acknowledges that the connection is involved in historical difficulties from which there is no escape save by conjecture. The mound builders were certainly of the cranial type of ancient Mexicans and Peruvians. All right, of the ancient Mexicans and Peruvians, the mounds had the same cranial type. Listen, the mound builders. And thus of the cranial type of all the natives of the Pacific slope, at least as far as Sitka, that is, brachycephalic. After the personal comparison of Peruvian skulls with the authentic mound builder skulls from Michigan and Indiana, and others from dolmens and mounds in central Tennessee, I feel confident, says Winchell, that the identity of the race of mound builders with the races of Anahuac, right? That's the real ancient name of central Mexico and the empire there, Anahuac. So if you're from Anahuac, you might be called an Anahuacan, Anuacan, Anunakin, Anuacan, Anunakin, and Peru will become generally recognized. All right. Connection with mound builders, with ancient Mexico and ancient Peru. The Abbé Brasseur de Bourbourg, after the ablest and most extensive researchers, declares that the pre-Aztec Mexicans or Toltecs were a people identical with the mound builders. All right? Identical with the mound builders. Gleason, with laudable national pride, claims that the mound builders originated in Ireland. But what's older in land, guys? And remember, again, I'm going to have to say it. This is why I did that video the other day. I'm going to keep reminding you. And this is from a historic, scholarly person on navigation, on the history of navigation. He's one of the most experts. He said if anybody was to cross the Atlantic, it had to have been American Indians. It had to have been. And remember what we found in Ireland, all these beans and all these old New World, so what they call New World, American beans, metal, wood that was washing ashore there, that became part of the habitat in Ireland, Scotland, and Scandinavia, and all Denmark, and all these places, right? But Gleason says they might have come from Ireland. Ireland was part of, I believe, Atlantis and is connected to ancient America. But remember, before Europe was even out of the primordial waters, America was already out. The land was already out here, is older. And this theory, he's saying of the Ireland one, this theory, as we may be convinced farther on, is as likely as any that may be proposed. Right? Conjecture, but it is connected. Ancient Ireland is connected to the mound builders. Already B.S. Barton in AD 1787 credited the Toltecs, whom he considered as descendants of the Danes. Descendants of the Danes, they're seen in reverse to me, guys. They're seen in reverse. Who's the Danes, Danites, Danes, who were more probably descended from the Irish. Who's the Irish? Who's the original Irish? Look at their annals and stories coming from other places with the building of the mounds. DeWitt Clinton, before the New York Historical Society in the year 1811, set forth some theories in which the Scandinavians figured as builders of the mounds in the state. All right, again, as he said earlier, all these are all conjectures that haven't been proven, and the Scandinavians came much later. And remember earlier, he just said that these shell mounds are much more recent than the ones in America, the American parent stock of the Scandinavian mounds. All right. We cannot, however, subscribe to either one's assumption. In spite of all historical data, Gravier's endeavors to prove that they were the posterity of the Northmen who made a few settlements on the American continent in the beginning of the 11th century of our era. 11th century, that's very recent. It is a fact, however, that the great resemblance between the monuments of the American mound builders and those of some ancient people in the northwestern parts of Europe, listen, that's the connection. I'm trying to tell you, they are connected, that we went over there. As for instance, the Great Serpent Mound of Loch Ness in Argyllshire and the Serpent Mounds of Wisconsin and Ohio seem to establish a relation of paternity and affiliation between these two nations. C.F. Allen states that the race of the Finns have inhabited the northwest of Europe before the arrival of the Gothic tribes, and that they buried their dead in vaults, gravkamri, sometimes covered with huge mounds of stone, earth, or gravel, and always finished with a layer of fertile soil and a fine carpet of grass. A stone mason tunnel often gave, on the eastern side, ready access to Tumuli. All right, just like the mound builders. The burial mounds which exist still in great numbers in Ireland have, as those of the United States, the shape and truncated pyramids from 12 to 15 feet high, with a diameter of from 12 to 21 feet at their top. In Ireland, as here, there are instances of one truncated cone being built upon the terrace of a larger one below. These tumuli bear still the significant name of Danish mounds, and are evidently covered with the fortifications and signal posts which in some parts of the island, especially in the county Down, are so numerous that a human voice could almost be heard from one to another. Some of these sepulchral and other similar monuments are met with in Denmark, in the midst of the fields or on top of natural monticles, with their ancient base still surrounded by a series of huge stone blocks which, with all our modern appliances, it would be hard to remove. Their form generally circular, ruddicer, is elliptical sometimes, landicer. It seems impossible to deny that they are the work of the same race that erected the grand monuments of the Mississippi and the Ohio Valley. All right, same race, same people. And again, if anybody was to cross the Atlantic, they had to come from this side. So we went over there and built those mounds. All right. But the question is where these works were executed first. All right, that's the question they all want to answer, but they don't want to admit, even though they got all the evidence telling them where it was erected first. They don't want to admit that because they would have to rewrite history, guys. Should we admit the principle of progress? We could hardly agree with some authors who defend the thesis of the mound builders' immigration from Europe. We can't entertain that because the European burial mounds bear evident features of a period posterior to that of American sepulchral pyramids. Why? Because those are more modern. Let's be logical. All right, stop saying they came from Europe when those mounds are much more recent than the ones in America. He's telling you straight up. There are, it is true, some signs of regular burial vaults in these states, but such vaults still exist in relatively perfect state of preservation on the northwestern coast of Europe and Denmark, especially. All right, in Denmark, where these Northmen are, right? So, who were the Northmen originally first, right? Remember, if anybody crossed the Atlantic, it had to be American Indians, and the currents, the Gulf Stream, and all these other currents bring you there. It literally brings you there, especially constructed of huge, erratic blocks of stone, whose inside face has been carefully dressed and sometimes adorned with engraven designs and figures. On these walls, forming the ceilings, rest one or more flagstones, not seldom of enormous size, and likewise smoothed down and ornamented. Besides the relics of their forgotten heroes, they contain all kinds of utensils, weapons, and finery, occasionally made of silver and gold with surprising art and skill. We have another reason to think that the mound builders' voyages across the Atlantic were rather from west to east. Look, another person telling you, right? From west to east, not the other way around. If anybody crossed the Atlantic first, they had to be American Indians. Then in the opposite direction, right? Because it seems hardly probable that the fatherland of this civilized and powerful nation should have been confined to a few and insignificant tracts on the European seaboard, right? It would be all over Europe, not just in a couple places, while its colonies should have worked wonders all over the surface of our immense republic, right? But in America, it's all over here. They're all over. There's so numerous, guys. This is a mark of ancient Americans. Mounds is a mark of ancient America. If no monuments west of the Rocky Mountains attest their immigration from Asia, none in Central nor in Eastern Europe indicate their European ancestry. All right, so stop saying that. He's telling you all these are theories and conjectures. Even in that book we've been reading, right? Researches into the lost history of America with the author, even though he's proven America's the old world, he's telling you all these deities, all these mythical ages and zodiacal representations of America. He's still trying to say they came from Asia. This is Asia. We are of the opinion, therefore, that the Danish mounds are venerable monuments testifying to another discovery and partial settlement of the old world by American nations. All right? Body bag for the illusion. Yo, shout out to Drop. Yo, shout out to 42 the Drop, because I'm using his phrases sometimes, right? Gotta give him the love. Yeah, this is a body bag for the illusion. I told you guys how many more books we're gonna have to read before you guys get on the bandwagon and empty your cup and know that America's a true old world. Again, I'm going to read this part again. Therefore, that the Danish mounds are venerable monuments testifying to another discovery and partial settlement of the old world by American nations. All right? We discovered Europe. We went over there first before anybody's trying to come over here and to so-called discover over here, right? We shall farther on find occasion to substantiate this view of ours. Like, he got whole chapters on this. We're gonna get into really deep in this book. It gets really deep, guys. That's why I wanted to read this. I wanted to start with these first couple of chapters so he can set the tone. And that's what we're doing with this full chapter we're reading today. We're almost done, but this is for the dismount, right? Letting you know it was from here to old Europe to Asia to Africa, not the other way around. They've been seeing it and telling us history in reverse. Okay? Again, we shall farther on find occasion to substantiate this view of ours by the positive statements of Plato and other Greek writers who are the only known historians of this distant American period. Again, what were they talking about, right? Atlantis, right? He's letting you know these so-called Greeks knew of America. We've already got videos on that. And we got other books telling us that. And we're going to get this book with many sources letting us know and quoting many so-called ancient historians that America was known to them. And it is the motherland, fatherland, grandma land. The mound builders themselves have left us no written record of their passage over this world. And the time and circumstances of their disappearance are involved in as deep as a mystery as those of their first apparition. Did they, as all ancient historic nations, sink down and vanish from sight under the weight of their impiety and of the crimes that tarnish the glitter of their material progress? Were they effeminated by vice, overrun by manly, barbarous hordes, as were the Assyrians, the Egyptians, and the Romans? How do you know these people weren't originally from here that they just quoted? Assyrians they come out of Ashur, right? Ashur is the son of Shem, right? Egyptians, that was right here. Ancient and Romans, what is a Roman? What is a so-called Roman? What are all these Roman roads and forts and coins they're finding here, right? What about what we read about Arizona, right? And everything else that correlates with some connection to ancient Romans in America. Colonel J.W. Foster, after much personal study of this subject, concluded that the mound builders were expelled from the Mississippi Valley by a fierce and savage race and found refuge in the more genial climate of Central America. The character of the arborescent vegetation, says the same author, found covering their works may be taken to some extent, but not absolutely, as a chronometric scale and estimating the time which has elapsed since their abandonment. 5 or 6 centuries, he tells us, would mark the extreme age of trees ordinarily found growing on the mounds and on the rubbish heaps thrown up in the mining operations. He urges, however, that this is unreliable because there may have been several generations of trees of the same or even of different species succeeding one another on the mounds. Again, another person telling you there could have been many stages of trees growing, decaying, and then another forest growing on top, decaying, then another forest. They don't know how old these mounds are. This latter hypothesis is highly probable, right? What have they found here? Ancient forests underneath buried layers of strata. We got the newspaper articles when they dug deep in these caves and found forests, guys. That their religion and morality were relatively pure at one time is sufficiently established by their material attainments and natural science. For history as well as Holy Scripture teaches us that a strong religious conviction in accord with human reason ever was the foundation of material and mental development. Considering the remains of their mounds that were likely built for religious purposes, Short states that their religion seems to have been attended with the same ceremonies in all parts of their domain, and that its rites were celebrated with great demonstrations is certain, he says. Foster assures us that the mound builders worship the elements, the sun, the moon, particularly the fire. All right, that's the hijack. Were they really worshiping them? They erected, he says, their fire altars for sacrifice on the highest summits. Were they really sacrificing? Or was it the first fruits of food? Or what were they really doing? That's what they always say, right? Like the Persian sun worshippers, just like the Persian sun worshippers, huh? They undoubtedly had their magi. Without whose presence the sacrifice could not go on. No gifts were too costly or costly to be offered up. The most elaborately carved pipes, precious stones brought from a distance, and garments woven with patient toil were freely condemned to undergo the ordeal of fire. But this is not all. The numerous reliquiae of charred bones leave behind a terrible conviction that on these occasions human victims were offered up as an acceptable sacrifice to the elements. We might ask, however, whether the charred relics were not rather remnants of cremated corpses. All right, there you go. He just contradicted himself. So, were these human sacrifices, or were these people just being cremated? Just like in the Davenport tablet, where they're showing people being cremated. They found mounds where people are being cremated. Was it really human sacrifice? We have noticed before that in a few burial mounds, we find proof of incineration of the dead. Like I just said, I didn't know about to read that. They found proof of people being cremated in the burial mounds, a fact which some might construe to signify that the mound builders did not believe in a future life nor in the resurrection of the body. But it ought to be remarked that the cremation was an exceptional way of disposing of the corpses, which were usually buried, both in the United States and on the European coast, right, on the coast towards America, with the greatest care, sometimes in sacred earth, brought from a distance. Thousands of mound builder skeletons have been found, some of them in a sitting posture, others lying down, surrounded by a huge protecting stones, and accompanied by precious, artistically made ornaments and vases of various shapes. It is doubtful whether these vessels contain food and drink for the deceased on their journey to eternity, but from the very circumstances that accompanied the burials themselves, there seems to be no doubt left but that this race still knew the truths of man's future life, of his moral responsibility for his past actions, and of his eventual resurrection. Should the mound builders have been the American nation described by Plato, again, are these mound builders the same as the American nation described by Plato? He's not telling you Atlantis. He said the American nation that Plato was describing when he was talking about Atlantis. We would find in his Timaeus and his Critias more ample information regarding their religion and consequent degree of civilization. But before listening to the ancient historian and philosopher, we deem it our duty to record a few more archaeological data bearing upon the memory of other prehistoric and now apparently extinct American peoples. All right. That was the end of chapter 3. As you guys see, chapter 4, other ancient American nations, we're going to get into on the next installment of, I guess this would be a new series or whatever, but we're going to get this book read. It has so much drop. I've been holding these books for years. I just, going into them little by little excerpts here and there we've read before, but we're going to read full chapters like we did today. I hope you guys enjoyed today's reading of chapter 3, again, of this book, History of America Before Columbus, according to documents and approved authors, by Peter Rowe. All right. Thanks for tuning in all the way to the end, hearing me read, taking the time to do that. I really appreciate you guys for doing that. If you like what I do, please like the video, subscribe to my channel if you haven't, share it with everybody. If you like to support what I do, I have on my Patreon page, and I also have my channel membership you can join. You can find those links in the description of this video if you'd like to support what I do. Either way, if you're willing and able or not, I'm going to still do it. I'm going to continue to do what I do anyways. All right. Shout out to all my patrons, all my moderators, all my channel members, all my longtime supporters, everybody who, motivates me to keep going. I appreciate all of you. I love y'all. Again, much love. Pura vida, mi gente. Wow.